Hello and welcome to this free masterclass, Why and How to Create a Literature-Rich Home and Homeschool. I'm so excited that you are sharing this time with me today, and I am super excited about the topic that we're going to be talking about today because I'm looking forward to sharing with you one of my passions, and that is building a family and homeschool culture around great living books. So I'm super excited to share that with you today, and I want to give you some practical tips that you can take away that will help you to have this literature-rich home and homeschool as well. I want to start by introducing myself. My name is Leah Courtney, and I'm a homeschooling mom of 4 and a homeschool business owner at As We Walk Along the Road. I have 4 children, and I have homeschooled from the beginning. 2 of my 4 are graduates now. One is in a 4-year university. The other finished an associate's degree and is looking at going on into a 4-year college. The other 2 are still at home, and they are homeschooling in high school. So we have homeschooled for almost 18 years now, which is kind of hard for me to believe when I say it. Before I had children, I was a classroom teacher, but I knew that I always wanted to homeschool my own children, and my husband and I knew that that was a priority. And I think sometimes that being a classroom teacher actually made homeschooling harder for me. Many people think that because I was a former teacher, I should be so good at this and it should just be amazing, but it hasn't always been like that. And there have been times that I think that having the experience of teaching sometimes made that transition into homeschooling a little rockier for me because I expected homeschooling to be just like classroom schooling, and it is not. But we have enjoyed our homeschool journey for almost 18 years now. And I'm really excited as I've watched my kids get older and I've watched the ones go on to graduate. And we're really nearing the end of the journey now with just the 2 high schoolers left. I am a homeschool business owner at As We Walk Along the Road. And As We Walk Along the Road started off as just a blog, but over the past few years has become a business with other things to offer besides just the blog. My goal is to create literature-based resources that will help homeschooling mamas to be able to homeschool with less stress. I know from years of experience that it can be overwhelming at times, especially if you have younger kids or if you have multiple kids spread out over grade levels. I know that it can be overwhelming to think about everything you need for homeschooling and to try to get all of your ducks in a row. And it can be frustrating and you can feel like you just can't do it all. And so my goal in a homeschool business has been to provide resources that will come alongside you and that will give you some practical help and encouragement as you seek to do that in your family. So As We Walk Along the Road will help you by providing those literature-based resources that you are looking for. And we'll talk some more about that later. But I want to get into what's really sort of the meat of this class. And I want to talk about why it's so important to have this literature-rich culture in your home and homeschool environment. Because I've said that to some people and they're like, okay, well, you really like to read books. And I don't like to read books as much, so this isn't that big of a deal. But from watching my own kids as well as watching many, many, many homeschool families over the years, I've come to see that there really are some great benefits to creating this literature-rich culture and environment in your home and homeschool. There are 2 main ones that I want to share with you. The first is that having a literature-rich culture creates this family language and shared experiences around great books. And I have a story that's a perfect illustration of this from my own kids. I was talking not too long ago with my now adult son. We were actually talking about theology, about things related to God and Christianity and our spiritual growth and spiritual life. And my son used the example from a book that is one of my all-time favorites. It is The Silver Chair from the Chronicles of Narnia. If you're a Chronicles of Narnia reader, you may or may not be familiar with this one because this isn't one that you may have heard of. Most people hear of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And if you watched the Disney movie adaptations, you might have heard of the first three, that most people consider the first three. But my favorite of all time is The Silver Chair. And in The Silver Chair, two children from our world, one is the cousin of the Pevensies that you might know from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and the other is a friend of his from school. They end up in Narnia and are given a task by Aslan, who, if you're familiar with the Narnia books, is symbolic often of Jesus Christ. They're given this task by Aslan, and they have to remember what they're supposed to do, and they have to accomplish this task, and they have all of these steps. And as a guide, they're led to a marshwiggle, which is a frog-like / human-like figure that lives, obviously, in a marsh. And their marshwiggle guide's name is Puddleglum. And he's a very dry, pessimistic fellow. But he's sort of the voice of reason to these kids as they go through on this quest that they're on. And he is often the voice that draws them back constantly to Aslan's instructions and reminds them of what they're there to do. And so Puddleglum has always been one of my favorite characters, definitely in the Chronicles of Narnia and probably throughout literature. And there are a number of things throughout the Book of the Silver Chair that we discussed. We've read the Narnia books probably 5-6 times as a family reading through the series. And so there were things that we discussed many times. And my son and I were having this conversation not long ago, and he brought up Puddleglum and something that Puddleglum says in the Silver Chair. And he's like, Mom, it's just like Puddleglum in the Silver Chair. And it really made me stop and think about how awesome this was that we had this shared language because of the books that we had experienced together. And it really makes a special time when you have this with your kids. There are other books that we've read that come back again and again that we talk about and we'll say, remember when we read this? The Redwall series is another one that often comes up in our family. But we will recall these moments in books that we read. And because we have this shared time, we have these shared experiences, and we have a shared language that comes from the books that we've read together. And so the relational benefit of that is just amazing. And it's really amazing to think that something like reading could be such a relational thing in your family. The other big reason that I think it's important to have this literature-rich environment is because the ability to read and comprehend and make connections with what you're reading is something that's going to really help your children throughout their college life, if they go to college, or throughout their career. Being able to read and to understand what you're reading and to make connections between your life and what you've read, that is something that is going to help your child to be a lifelong learner. And when we have a literature-rich environment in our home and homeschools, then we can enforce that and we can encourage that ability and that skill in our kids so that they can have that ability to read and to comprehend and to learn And when they can, that's going to stay with them, and it's going to be something that's going to help them as they continue to learn past their homeschooling years. My daughter, who is in a 4-year college, commented when she started her first college classes, she commented about how much better prepared she felt she was in a lot of academic ways because of the way that we had homeschooled. And one of the big things was being able to read and understand material on her own without having to wait for somebody to explain it all to her. Because of that, she was able to read material, she was able to get through it without having to have it all explained by the professor, which allowed her to get ahead and to be able to accomplish assignments on her own and to be able to learn on her own. They also, in one of her early classes, did annotations, which was basically reading through and commenting on different sections of the book, different passages and sentences. And we had never directly done annotations in our homeschool, but because we always had this literature and we had had discussions around it, and we had had so much exposure to it, that was something that she picked up really easily because she had been raised in this literature-rich environment, and that had been such a part of our homeschooling as well. So this ability to read and comprehend is something that's going to help our kids to be lifelong learners, and it's going to stick with them well past their homeschooling years. So we know that having this culture where great books are such an important part of the family has so many academic as well as relational benefits. So that takes us up to the how. Now that you know how important this is, how can you develop this environment in your own home and homeschool? Because that's what you're probably really here to know. If you had an interest in this class and you wanted to watch it, probably what drew you was that you already knew to some degree that literature and this literature-rich culture was important. So let's talk about some practical ways that we can develop this kind of literature-rich environment in our home and homeschool. There's 3 ways that we're going to go over. This kind of summarizes them, but we're going to get into each a little bit deeper. One way is to create an environment filled with books. That seems pretty easy, doesn't it? But I'm going to give you some tips with that because if you, like me, have a small environment, it can sometimes be a little more difficult to have all of the books that we want. To read aloud regularly, and reading aloud is something that I especially have a passion for. And then to use literature-based homeschooling resources to learn with real books. So let's dive into those a little bit more deeply. The first is to create an environment filled with books. Now, our family, like many homeschool families, is a one-income family primarily, and has been throughout most of our homeschooling years. So we don't have tons and tons of money for books. We also have 6 people in our family, and we live in a fairly small space. Our house is about 1,400 square feet. Now, as much as I would love to have bookshelves on every single wall of our home, and as much as I would like to line them all with great books, not everybody in the family agrees that all of our space can be dedicated to just books. So if you don't have tons of money and you don't have tons of space, how can you still create an environment filled with books? And does it really matter how many books you actually have? I read a study not long ago that looked at children who grew up in an environment with books and children who didn't. And then it looked at their long-term academic performance. And the children that had grown up in the environment with books definitely had an advantage when it came to academics and ability in school. Now, cause correlation does not equal causation. So does having all the books in the home cause the kid to be extra smart and succeed? Probably that's not the only cause. Probably people who have lots of books in their environment at home probably have other factors that are contributing to the academic success of their children. But there definitely is a correlation between an environment filled with books and your child's academic performance. So if that's so important and you need to have those books, but you don't have lots of space and you don't have lots of money, what can you do? The first thing you can do is utilize your library. Now, this masterclass is being recorded for the first time during the COVID pandemic. So if it is being watched later on, people might not understand what I mean when I say if you can go to your library, because some libraries have been closed with all of the different shutdowns due to the pandemic. I know that many libraries at least have a drive-up service where you can pick up books. Now, I'm not sure if every library system has done that yet. But I still think that utilizing your library is a very important part of having these books if you don't have money to constantly buy books. And I would encourage you to utilize your library in the right way, because I know that when my kids were young, I often paid more in late fees than I would have paid if we had just bought some of those books. Because I didn't have a very good system for a while of remembering when to take the books back to the library. So utilize your library with a little common sense, develop your own system, whatever works the best for you. But that's a great way to bring in more books to your environment. Buy used books. That's another really good one. Amazon often has books that are used. Library book sales have used books. There are lots of sites on Facebook Marketplace where you can find used books. So definitely that is a route to go to get some books in a less expensive way. And then also check out free books on the Kindle. If you have a Kindle app on your phone or on your computer or on your tablet, there are so many free books for Kindle. And I know that's not exactly the same as having physical books in your environment, but it is still a way to have lots of exposure to lots of books. And so I still suggest it as a great way to get more books into your life. Another way is to swap books with friends, and I enjoy doing this because lots of times you'll be talking to another homeschool mom and you'll be really excited about a book that you've been reading with your kids, and she'll be really excited about a book that she's been reading with her kids. And so when you're through reading them yourselves, you can swap them. That's a great way to access more books and to be able to have them without having to go out and buy them brand new. Now, if you don't have a lot of room to put these books, obviously checking them out from the library is a good option, because then they're going to go back to the library and they don't have to have a place to permanently live in your house. But if you still are getting too many books, then you have room to display. One suggestion that I would have for you is to create a book basket. A book basket, we've used a book basket to collect books on topics that we're studying in school. So instead of having all the books out, if you don't have room for them, if you're studying, say, ancient Greece, then you're going to pull out books on ancient Greece, either books that you own on your own bookshelves or books from the library, and then you're going to put them in the book basket for the time period that you're learning about ancient Greece. And that way, kids have access to more books, but you might not have room to pull out every single book that you own. So this is a good way if you don't have tons of room to display them. I also didn't put on this list, but a good way to have some more storage room for your books is to just make sure that you have your bookshelves as high as they can be. So if you can have built-in bookshelves, I'm really serious, because I have some that are small, like 4-foot tall bookshelves, and I I'm like, okay, there's no space here to put books because they're short. They only go halfway up the wall. But if you can have big, tall bookshelves that go all the way up to your wall, all the way up to your ceiling, then you're taking up so much more space. You have so much more space for books. So that's another tip for having a little bit of more room for those books. But creating an environment filled with books is a good step on your way to creating this literature-rich homeschooling environment. The next tip that I would give you is to read aloud regularly. And you'll notice that my first sentence there with all caps, read aloud to all ages. Many people read aloud to their little kids, toddlers, preschoolers, but when kids start reading independently, they stop reading aloud. And I want to tell you that reading aloud to big kids is so important. There are so many relational benefits to reading out loud. There are benefits for writers, kids who have lots of great books with good vocabulary in them, read aloud to them, become better writers because they learn to use that same vocabulary and those sentence structures in their own writing. Kids that are older, when you read books aloud with them, you have so many opportunities for great discussion, points that come up. If you have a book that addresses a topic that you think is important to introduce, but you're not quite sure that you're ready for your child to read it independently, read it aloud together and talk about it. You can use that as a time to discuss it. So I would say read aloud to all ages as long as you possibly can. I would still read aloud to mine when time permits. We're just not all together that often to read aloud. But we did read aloud as a family up until my oldest started working. My oldest two had jobs and different places they were going. They had some classes outside of home in their high school years. And so slowly our reading aloud with all four and me so slowly dwindled away. And then my younger two, I've read to them up until probably last year. We haven't really read together much this year because they also had different school schedules. But I would say read aloud as long as you possibly can to your big kids. Have a set time for reading aloud, and this is part of what I think is important. If you're going to read with your older kids, it really helps if you have that consistent time established, because chances are your older kids are doing different things in their schoolwork than your younger kids are. And if you have a set time, then everybody knows, okay, this is the time that we're reading aloud together. So nothing else is scheduled during this time. This is a time that we're going to protect for reading aloud together. For us, for years, it was at lunchtime. I would fix the kids' lunch, and then I would sit and read aloud while they ate lunch, and then I would eat my lunch after they had all eaten lunch. And that was just a great time to do it. They were taking a break from school anyway. They were sitting down. They were calm for the most part and quiet for the most part. And it was just a great time for us to read aloud. But you can use whatever works for you. Some moms like to use a morning basket, and so they start off the day doing things with the whole family, and reading aloud is a good part of that. Lunchtime. Sometimes families like to include dad and read aloud together at night. But whatever works for you, make sure that you're doing it regularly. And then pick quality books for reading aloud. I will tell you, as a mostly Charlotte Mason mom, I love to use great living books in our home and homeschool. But I will also confess that there have been many times over the years when my kids wanted to pick up what I would definitely consider twaddle. These were books that were maybe based on TV shows or kids' characters, or the diary style books that were really popular for a long time. and they were not great quality living books. But unless the book had something bad in it, I often let them pick these books up to read for themselves. But I made sure that the books we were reading together were really good books. That way they were exposed to the kinds of books that I wanted them to be exposed to, even if that's not what they were always picking for their own independent reading. And I found, and you might find as well, that when you read more of those kind of books aloud, they will tend to pick those books as their independent reading because they'll be more interested in those, having already been introduced to them. If you're looking for great books and you don't know where to look as a resource to find some ideas for good living books, I have a living books catalog that is free to access, and I am always adding to it. It is organized by age, grade level, and then also by different historical time periods or different subject area connections. You can find it at resources.aswewalkalongtheroad.com/livingbooks. I have that address there. And I will also have a link that you can download this set of slides in case there's something that you want to refer back to. So that URL will be there for you to have then. So that's a great place for you to go to find some living books if you're not sure what books are great. And then the last tip that I would give you to create this literature-rich environment in your home and homeschool is to use literature-based homeschooling resources. So when I talk about literature-based homeschooling resources, I mean homeschool curricula or homeschool resources that are based on real books instead of being based on a textbook or a workbook. Literature-based homeschooling resources are more compelling and they help learners to connect more with what they're learning. In our home, when we first began homeschooling, I was using a very structured curriculum with textbooks and workbooks. I've mentioned that I was a classroom teacher, and so I had an idea that this is the kind of curriculum we should use. That's what we used in the classroom. And so we started off with that, and we made it through the kindergarten years with me doing a little supplementing or a little changing around of things. But we were still sticking pretty much to that traditional curriculum. And then I can distinctly remember the day that my oldest, she was a first grader at the time, and we were reading a history lesson in a little textbook that she had. And we were sitting on the floor together and we were reading this lesson. And this was my child. She really did enjoy reading and she enjoyed school. Most anything that I said, okay, we're going to do this schoolwork, she was in for it. She just enjoyed school. But we were sitting there reading and I realized that both of us were just pretty bored because this book was just boring. It wasn't interesting. There was nothing about it that really made you want to keep reading it. And I decided then that I was going to do something different, that we were not going to keep using these textbook-based resources, that there had to be something better that we could use. And I decided that we were going to learn using just great books. Now, at the time, I didn't know tons about homeschooling curriculum. Like I say, I had kind of gone mostly with what was available to me as a classroom teacher, and that's what I had used for homeschooling. So I didn't know that there were a lot of literature-based resources, and in fact, when my oldest kids were younger, there were much fewer. So on my own, I started creating our own materials based on books. And one year I created a whole year-long lesson structure based off of good books. At the time, I was selling Usborne books, and we had lots of great favorites. And so I built our curriculum that year based off of those books. And I quickly learned that learning from real books made learning so much more fun. I enjoyed it more. The kids enjoyed it more. And they were learning more because they were actually connecting with what we were reading instead of just sort of, oh, okay, let's get through it when we read from a textbook. So literature-based learning can really help kids make those connections, and it's much more compelling than just reading out of a textbook. Now, you don't have to do what I did and create your own totally literature-based curriculum, because now there are many different resources that are sold that are boxed sets of literature-based homeschooling curriculum. And that's great because now you can actually get a whole year's worth of curriculum that is literature-based, and it's awesome. And we have done that over the years. But we have also done this last tip here, literature unit studies. We've used lots of literature-based unit studies. I like those as much or more than the boxed curriculum because we can do a unit study that is a shorter period of time. So when I think of boxed curriculum, I'm thinking of a year-long curriculum, and that's great. We've done some of those. But literature unit studies focus in on one particular book, and all of the learning revolves around that one book. So that means that throughout the year, we can do multiple unit studies because we have time to read more than one book. So we're changing up what we're learning, which is making it new and fresh. But at the core of it, we're still learning how to read and relate to literature and how to learn from reading, which is what's going to be the lifelong benefit of being able to read and comprehend and make connections. So I love using literature-based unit studies in our homeschool. And over the years, I have made our own literature-based unit studies. I have found some online, some are free, some are we purchased, but I love using literature-based unit studies. And I got to the point where I really liked creating my own, but sometimes it took me so long to sit down and find a little bit of this and a little bit of that and pull it all together. And when I would talk about literature unit studies with other homeschool moms, some homeschool moms were right with me. Yeah, I do that too. But then some homeschool moms were kind of intimidated about trying to create their own literature unit study. It would be so much easier for them to use an already created unit study. And so I have developed some of those, and I've sold them independently on the blog. I have a few of those for sale in my blog store. But then I had another idea. I wanted to have a resource where moms could get literature-based unit studies, but not just one unit study that they bought and then did with the kids and then finished and it was over. I wanted something where I could provide regular literature-based unit studies that homeschool moms could use and continue doing unit studies all throughout the year with their kids. And so out of that came the idea for Down the Literature Road. Down the Literature Road is a membership community. And when you are a member, you get literature-based unit studies delivered to your inbox every single month. You also have access to a literature-based homeschooling resource library. And you have access to a community of other literature-loving homeschoolers. So Down the Literature Road was created to make using literature unit studies easier. Basically, in this membership, when you join, and you can join as a monthly member or an annual member, and when you join, you are going to get a unit study, a brand new unit study every single month. Plus, as each new unit study is added, it's going to be a part of a resource library where you can keep going back. So maybe if you miss a unit study 1 month, you can go back and use that unit study later because it's always there for you in the resource library. These unit studies are all based off of great kids literature, and they have one book as the core. Kids will do language arts based off of this book that they're reading, and then other subject areas will be included as well. Typically science and history or social studies. Sometimes there will be fine arts or other elective subjects also. So could this be your sole curriculum? Maybe is my answer for that, because I know that some homeschool moms like to go a little bit deeper into subject areas like history and science, and some, especially with younger elementary school kids, are happy to just brush those topics and do a little bit of this that counts as history and a little bit of that counts as history. I was fine to do that in elementary school. As my kids started getting older, I wanted to have a designated history curriculum and a designated science curriculum. But we still continued using literature unit studies because it was okay that we also did a little bit of history and a little bit of science, and we learned these extra things along the way. So the resources that you'll find down the literature road will be primarily language arts related, but will also touch on other subjects like science and history and fine arts and other great subjects. So some other homeschooling mamas have had a chance to try some of the unit studies in the style that we are going to have inside the membership. Other homeschooling moms have been impressed, and I just put a few testimonials here of some things that other homeschooling moms had to say when they tried out the unit study. These unit studies are primarily developed for grades 2 to 8, but there are activities suggested that you can use with your younger kids or older kids, because one of the things that I love about using a unit study is using it with the whole family. I love it when the whole family can learn together. And so that's what I wanted to create, so that you could have your whole family learning together, even if you had some older kids or some younger kids. Now, if you want to know a little bit more about what a unit study will look like, what do you really get every month? Here is just a sneak peek, and I'm only showing you a few things because I don't want to give it all away. But I do want you to know what you're getting yourself into if you decide to join us in Down the Literature Road. So one of the upcoming unit studies is based on the book called The Orphan Band of Springdale, which is an amazing book, by the way. I read it with my younger girls several years ago. We loved it. But here are some things that you'll find inside a unit study. There will always be a section that will describe how to use the guide, because if you're a brand new member and you've never used one of our unit studies before, I want you to know what to do and how to start. I want you to be able to jump in right away and get started without having to try to figure out how something goes. Also, there will always be a list of what subjects and topics are covered in that month's unit study. As I said, there will always be multiple subject areas covered, usually history and science, and then occasionally fine arts and other subjects as well. You'll also get a detailed daily 4-week lesson plan. So each book is going to be scheduled out to last a month, 4 weeks. And some months that have 5 weeks will give you a month in between that you can catch up or do other things, or that you can extend it on your own if you are really enjoying the book and there are other things you want to do with it. But each unit study will have a detailed 4-week lesson plan. And the lesson plan is going to tell you exactly what activities to do every day. But of course, we are homeschoolers. And if you are like me, you enjoy the ability to be flexible. And so you can be flexible as well. You can pick and choose what activities you want to do. If there are activities that just don't fit you very well, don't fit your kids very well, that's okay. You can choose to do other activities and just skip over those. So these are a few things that all of the unit studies will include. All of the unit studies that you get inside Down the Literature Road. I would love to have you join us. I would love to provide this resource to you so that you can use great literature unit studies with your kids every single month without having to go hunt around here or hunt around there and try to cobble your own unit studies together. I would love to provide this as a resource for you, and I would love to have you come and join us down the literature road. You'll see a URL here with the video that you can check out to learn more, but you can also find it at this URL that is written out, shopnow.aswewalkalongtheroad.com/membership. And you can come and find out more about Down the Literature Road and join us today. Thank you so much for watching this free class. And if you have questions, please leave them in the comment section. I will be glad to answer those questions. I will be glad to give you more information about the membership or to answer questions about the tips for creating this literature-rich homeschool environment. Thank you for joining us.